Welcome to Focus on Why. I'm Amy Rowlandson, your host. Join me to explore the compelling stories, profound insights, and captivating experiences shared by my guests from all over the world, focusing on the importance of why these relatable, uplifting, and inspiring conversations will empower, motivate, and guide you to create your own purposeful way of life. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we start, have you signed up to receive my weekly email newsletter, Friday Focus? Every Friday, I focus on one topic with one action arising. The link to sign up is in the show notes. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Paul Ribbons. Paul, hello.
How are you, Amy?
I am very well. All the better for having you on the show.
Thank you very much.
So let's get this show on the road. What is it that you're focusing on at the moment?
There's quite a few things I'm focusing on. I've got some property stuff that I'm focusing on. I've got a tech startup I'm working on at the moment, and generally, I'm sort of getting my life back together because we had a bit of a shock, which I may go into a bit later, but we had a bit of a shock a couple of years ago, and I'm sort of rebuilding in a way. And it's funny, I was watching something today, and someone talked about age. And the world we live in is very, especially in the tech world, it's very young. And I'm thinking, no, I'm 62 next month, right? And I feel like a 21-year-old. I don't feel any different to I did when I was 21. So in a way, it's like my life is taking the next chapter, and I'm building that chapter.
And you say that you feel like you're 21, but you have the benefit of 4 decades of wisdom and experience with that.
Yes.
So how does that change the way that you're approaching this next chapter?
I think it's I do remember when I was that age, and things were harder because you had to prove yourself, where today I don't have to prove myself. So I've got the benefit of time on my side. And the most important thing, which is something I learned when I was 23. I first got into a state agency when I was 23. And when I got involved, a guy said to me, look, this business will take you, 95% will take you 2 to 5 years to learn. You'll learn about deeds of variation, possessory titles, timber and damp. He said, but the other 5% takes you all your life to learn. That's people. And I look at them 4 decades of dealing with people, because as an agent, you're dealing with clients, buyers, you're dealing with professional entities, mortgage companies, solicitors, and all that has built up over the years. And gives you an edge, really, because your communication is probably the most paramount skill that anyone can master. Because if you think about it, communication really is about listening and understanding. And I did 100 life lessons recently, and my number one was seek first to understand before being understood, which is Stephen Covey's one of his 7 habits of highly effective people. And that one thing I really understand and get, and so that gives me an edge, so I can accelerate a lot quicker than I would have done if I was younger.
And it is one of my favorite lessons from the 7 habits of highly effective people. You mentioned about the need to prove yourself. To whom?
To me. It came from a not particularly great upbringing. I lost my mother when I was 3, and my dad remarried, and he didn't marry a particularly nice person. And their son was treated very differently to me. And so it was, I grew up very early realizing that I'm being treated very differently from someone else. Someone else was more important than I was. They got more than I got. And as a child, that's very difficult because you're learning valuable lessons at that early stage that forms your character. So I had severe dyslexia, and they put it down to me being a problem child. They put me down to me being, and this is contradiction in terms. They said I was easily led, but I was, I'm a bad influence. Which is it? I mean, Come on, but I was a bad influence on a lot of people because I was trying to prove to myself that I was worthy, that I was worthy of someone's love, I was worthy of someone's attention, their kindness, because I wasn't. My childhood was fearful. I was always fearful as a child that I was going to get into trouble for doing something. I get beaten with a coat hanger. I was told I couldn't. I mean, my overriding memory was being caught with a chocolate spread sandwich when I was 8 years of age, and my mother rubbing it in my face and making me to go to bed with it on my face. So I had to. I wanted to prove to myself and the world that I wasn't as worthless as I felt inside.
I'm sorry you had that experience. It does sound, difficult at best. And
Mm.
what I'm also hearing is where you'd been dealt with very differently and treated very differently. It's shaped you, has guided you. It's also encouraged you to go on to excel in the way that you have. Now, that's with hindsight that we can see, where you are now, and you're involved in the property stuff and the tech startup. And it's not easy at the time. And those, it's easy to look at that and say, okay, those challenging times led me to this and inspired me, because it could have gone the other way.
It nearly did, because there was a police officer, because I had entrepreneurial skills at a very early age, and because I was denied things, I thought, well, then they're not going to stop me from having them. So I would go and get them. So I was up to no good from probably the age of about 10, 11. I mean, I was smoking at 11 years of age and nicking things, and I was outside the home. I had the freedom because we were kicked out and said, like, go down the library on a Saturday. Would you send kids down to the library all day on a Saturday? Would you think they're going to sit there and read books? Not at 10 years of age, they're not. So uh, I I got to about 15, 16, and I'd stolen something, and the police officer caught me. Well, they came round to the house, and and this police officer, you get people in your lives that guide you or knock you off the path you're on onto a different path. And he said to me, look, it's really straightforward. And he could have nicked me, he could have actually charged me. And he was asking me questions, and I was telling him, yeah, well, he said, where's your mum? She said, she's dead. Well, who's looking after you? My dad. They don't care, I'm not. So he said to, because I was 16 and I wasn't even living at home, I was living in a bed sit. And he said to me, you've had a rough hand delivered to you. You've been dealt a rough hand. He said, but you've got two choices. You either keep on the path you're on, and he said, you're a smart lad, and you'll probably end up in prison because you'll accelerate. You'll go into nicking cars to order, and you'll probably be, robbing shops. Or he said, because you're in with the wrong crowd. He said, or you can go this way. And he said that route is the right route. He said, and so I'm not gonna lick you. I'm gonna let you go. This is a warning. And that moment changed the direction of my life. It was a guiding force that made me realise that if I did stay on that route, I wasn't going to go in the right place. And mates of mine were in prison, Borstal. They were young Borstal attendees, and so I knew that was the path if I wasn't careful. So I had a fortunate to have that experience because I didn't have any what do they call them role models in my life at the time. My father didn't give my uncle didn't, excuse my language, my uncle was a really bad influence on me because he was a drug addict and an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic, and so I had some really bad role models as a child. So that one experience taught me a serious lesson.
And you say you didn't have any role models of any great length, but this policeman coming in, or police officer coming in at this point and being a role model for a few minutes was
Mm,
enough to shift your course.
yeah,
And you said you'd been dealt a rough hand, and it is like playing cards. It is as a lucky hand. It is random as that.
it is, and it's up to you how you play that hand, isn't it? So it's that's the key to life for me, and I do remember when I left school, I had a decision to make because I didn't have any qualifications. I didn't go the last year. I was working in a bakery at the weekends and after school. In the end, the guy said, well, if you've got any spare time, come in and we'll pay you. Well, I was there all the time. I didn't go to school. So I left school no qualifications. And the only advice I ever got from my father that I remember, and I'll state that because he probably did give me advice. I probably didn't listen to him. But this stuck with me. He said, if you get into food, clothing, or housing, you'll never be skint. You'll always find a job. And I had the job in the bakery, and that was my career choice. I thought, that's food. That's fit. That was the career choice at the time. And so the one thing that drove me during that period, I was always ambitious, but I didn't think I could do a different job. I always thought it'd be a manual job. I might go on a building site. I had a job for a while, coil winders, mate in Hawker Siddeley power transformers. Everything was manual job. But in my head, I knew I could do something different. I could be something different. And I got to bakery manager in the end. I mean, that I was pleased with that. But my life was very jaded at the time. I was blaming everybody else for how I was turning up. Not how I'd been treated. I was blaming everybody else because it was up to me how I turned up. It wasn't up to anybody else. I had to make that decision. And it wasn't until I got to 23 years old that I realized I'd lived longer than my mother had. And that one thing made me realize that every single day after that was a bonus. And then I made a decision then, or couple of decisions. One was to go and buy a flat, get myself my girlfriend had dumped me, I think, previous to that. I wanted to get her back. I wanted to buy a flat and I wanted to change my career. And while I was buying the flat, I was watching estate agents and I'm thinking, I could do that. And my goal then in my mind was to get a job in the estate agents. It took me 9 months. I make it sound like it was really quick, but I bought the flat, then sold it, and it's actually the agent who sold it for me because I bought it for 28 grand and sold it for 42 9 months later. And it was the agent who sold the flat. I badgered him so much. In the end, they gave me a job. All right, I had to do some quite big things to do that, but there was that was the moment that my whole life changed. Them decisions from that moment of 23 years of age, I knew I could not accept mediocrity any longer. My mother wouldn't have approved. And it's funny because I didn't know my mother. I was 3, but I know about her because just for the things she did. And one of the things she did, and my stepmother and my father rented a property, but my mother and my father at the time, when I was younger, bought a house. And that was unusual in the 1960s for the average person, right? So it wasn't until I got till I was older, I realized that she had a lot of ambition, my mum. She wanted to, so she wouldn't have approved of me being jaded. She wouldn't have approved of me being, wasting my life. And so it was a very, very big turning point. Again, a different type of turning point, than from the police officer, but it was a turning point nonetheless.
And essentially another role model, albeit not a living one.
Yeah, definitely. Because I always look up and you say, "Funny who's in there," and I spoke to her for years. I still do, but it's like she's like my guiding star. I know I'm a Christian. I've got faith, and I believe that people should treat each other the way that you'd want to be treated. And so I've got strong values, Christian values. So I think, and that comes from having that faith that she's there guiding me, being my guardian angel.
And you've spoken about faith and having strong values and having this guiding force. Where does purpose fit in, Paul?
It's funny because I was listening to the Simon Sinek thing about your why. And I think, and I think sometimes we can get wrapped up with a purpose that's esoteric and it's bigger than me. And I think sometimes we can lose sight of what is actually driving us as a human being. But one of the things that I notice with people is their pain, because it's like a fisherman can see another fisherman from afar. You see a fishing boat, he'll see it's a fishing boat. It's not just a boat, it's a fishing boat. And I think it's like looking in the mirror. So when I see people who have had difficult times, emotional, mentally, they're the things that I want to solve it for them. I want to help them, guide them in the right way. I didn't have that guidance myself, but I want to be able to impart that onto someone else. That's why I practiced NLP. That's why I studied psychology. And one of the reasons, and I said right at the beginning, like Greg Giorgio said to me about the 5%, it's all about people, it's about understanding psychology. And so I try and impart my knowledge or my guidance on with people who want it, because you're a coach yourself. Some people, you can see they need it, they don't want it. Right? You've got to have the right people. So my purpose in a way is to impart my experiences, my adversities, and how I coped with them and how I overcome them with the determination and the resilience to move forward, and impart that to somebody else. So that's one of the things that's the purpose behind everything I do. And this is probably fundamental behind even that. And that's the need for freedom, because I didn't feel free as a child. I was, and I look at it this way. I was trying to explain this the other day because I was thinking about what we're going to be talking about today. And my life is you ever see you get the news clips of the kids in Afghanistan or Syria. I mean, they've got this sort of 10 or 12-year-old kid with an AK-47 in their hands, right? And it's the AK-47 that symbolizes either oppression or liberation, freedom, because you can break away from that tyranny, and that tyranny was in my life. And so in a way, my life is like an AK-47. I can either be oppressed by it, or I can use it as freedom and liberty. And so that's always behind my in the back of my mind is I want to do what I want, when I want, whenever I want, with whoever I want. That's always been my driver, because freedom is important. Because how many people do you see? They think they're free, but they're stuck in a world in their own minds. They're being controlled. I mean, I even realized that the internet, if you're not careful, can trap you in a filter bubble that you think that's the whole world, as opposed to looking beyond and going, okay, so what is really happening right now? What is actually going on in the world? I hear people talking about it's so bad nowadays, it's worse than it was. No, everything is viewable today. It's no worse or better than it was. In fact, it is better because we have a better standard of living. But people only see what they see on their filter bubbles. They can be trapped online, they can be trapped in relationships, they can be trapped in their jobs without realizing everybody is free and we have freedom. We just have to understand that everything is a choice. Everything you do is a choice, and I choose freedom every time.
And if we were to dive deeper, Paul, what does freedom mean to you?
And being free of tyranny, being of control, people controlling me, systems controlling me, governments controlling me. I'm a great believer in. We need regulation. We need laws. Otherwise everyone would be killing each other, wouldn't they? Right? But there are certain things that I don't want to be controlled about. So to me, it's about that choice. It's having the mental fortitude to say, I choose this. I've got that in me to make that choice for myself, not be influenced by others. Because there is a fine influence. So you fine line between influence and manipulation, and we're being manipulated even by, and we're going to touch on this in a second. We're being manipulated by companies about their products, and we are both a member of an unusual club, which is teetotal, sobriety, whichever you want to discuss it. The we are conditioned by society to say, let's go and celebrate this, and oh, I've had a bad day, let's have a glass of wine. It's cool to drink. It's a drug, right? If they found it today, they'd probably ban it, right? But that's just one area I'm talking about, where we're conditioned all the time by brands, governments, people online, and everyone's got a voice nowadays. Have you noticed that? Everywhere you go, someone's got something to say. And I'm a great believer in that. I make my own mind up on what information is being given to me and where it comes from, and I make sure I check it. So I don't want to be conditioned by someone who says, oh, Barry from Bushy on Facebook said the vaccination was this, or COVID was that, or the governments have done this and they're all corrupt. I don't want to listen to them. I want to get that information for myself from reliable sources, so I know I can make the right choices, and it's going to improve my life.
And it's so true. There's a great book called Factfulness by Hans Rosling. And in there's a questionnaire about checking and understanding how up to date your thinking and your data pool is. And it's, as you said, where people say, oh, it's never been as bad as this before, and et cetera, et cetera. It's not the truth. And it's not the case that there are many things that are absolutely, I don't want to be absolute, but there are lots of things that are taken on board as fact, but are not. They're myth. They're then perpetually cycled as truth. Now, you've spoken a lot about influence and manipulation, right from being that young child who was easily led, but also a bad influence. You're now talking about influence and manipulation. That hasn't changed in the sense that there are always going to be people choosing different ways in life. The route that you've chosen, that you consciously chose from, quite young, to be fair, from that 16-year-old conversation with the police officer to the 23-year-old, I'm going to be an estate agent, to where you are and find yourself now, that determination, as your words again, which was determination and understanding that you can overcome the obstacles, you can use resilience, you can have adversities, but they're not going to define who you are. And you're helping to guide others in your mentoring, coaching, solving and helping people, imparting your knowledge. What is it that is driving you to do all of this, Paul?
It probably comes down to that little lad at my nan's house when I first realised my mother wasn't there, and the injustice of what followed. And to me, I don't like to see injustice. Could you remember that I did, one of my life lessons was, you have to accept that sometimes life is unfair. You're not always going to be dealt the best hand in life. Some people are born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and they might be, drug addicts. You don't even know what's going on in somebody's life. But there's always injustices going on, and I think this is where it comes from. It's knowing that little boy could have had a very, very, very different life, but was strong enough to make the decisions. I mean, I do remember I was rebellious. I became very rebellious because I wouldn't tolerate, them injustices. I wouldn't tolerate. I don't think anyone should. Anyone, you shouldn't be oppressed. You shouldn't. If you think about human beings, right? We're a wonderful species. And if we look at all the religions, we look at all of them, they've all got similarities. And we tend to look at the differences between religions as opposed to because it all, if you think about it, religion is a code of conduct. You've got society's code of conduct, you've got religious code of conduct, and you've got nature's code of conduct. Nature's code of conduct can be very cruel, very cruel. If we was left to our own devices without a code of conduct, God knows where we would be. But I think it's that little lad that was fortunate enough to have the strength and fortitude to say, no, 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 it's not gonna affect me and destroy my life. And I think that's well, if that answers your question. I'm not sure if it does actually. But.
You mentioned several times this being able to move forward in whatever way with whatever you have at that point. And now that you have the privilege, luxury, is it? I don't know. I think it's been something that you have created
A
over the
responsibility, I
years.
see it. A
Yeah.
responsibility.
Okay, brilliant. So with that responsibility, you now consider your life unfolding, being able to do what you want, when you want, how you want, and be what you want, how you want to be.
Mm.
It is a conscious building of phases. You mentioned right at the beginning, property stuff, tech startup, and getting your life back together again after a shock a couple of years ago. Again, you said you were rebuilding. So there's been this cycle, and what you have is what you then take forward, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So if you look back over my life, so I first, when I became an agent, I was single, I was enjoying myself, and I got married, had a couple of kids, went for a nasty divorce, and that's probably another phase. And then all of a sudden, you've got responsibilities. There's I'm having to rebuild because I'm not one of these that there's part of me. I didn't take anything from the divorce. I left it with my ex-wife, knowing full well she was going to give it to the kids anyway. So it didn't. I don't want to take my kids' house away. I wanted them to live, and so I've got the ability to rebuild, and I had to rebuild back in 95, 96. And then I had to make a decision because being a divorced dad and being an estate agent don't mix because you have to work hard, especially in the 90s. There was a recession. So I made a decision then to leave and go self-employed. I had to go and buy myself another house. And then on top of that, then I went self-employed. So I could have my kids when I wanted them. Because remember, this is about freedom, right? And then all of a sudden, whereas I had different priorities, I'm thinking someone else is controlling when I've got to work. And I've got an ex-wife controlling and saying, you can only have the kids on these days. And I'm thinking, well, I want the kids whenever I can. So flexibility was key because I believe in flexibility. The most successful human beings are the most flexible thinking human beings. So I'm thinking, how can I, and because I always ask myself that question, how can I have the kids when I want them without causing grief from both parties? And so I went self-employed, and that's when I became a developer stroke trader. So I had this lovely period in my life where I worked when I wanted. I was fortunate to earn substantial large lumps of cash. So that gave me the breathing space when I could have the kids for 6 weeks, or, if I didn't want to work for 3 months, I didn't have to. So that flexibility was there all the way through. And then other things affect your life, because you just don't know what's around the corner. You have no idea. And then one of my kids came out when she was 18 and said, Dad, I want you to call me Zoe. I'm transgender. She's 6'6", right? She had some serious mental health issues as she was growing up, and she became my priority because your kids. I mean, as much as I like to think I can influence people, this was something I couldn't understand. I'd never ever wanted to change genders. It's something that I had to deal with, and so these things come along, and you're effectively starting over again. It's like, well, where's the rule book on this? I mean, if you think about being a parent, Right? No one gives you a handbook, do they? And so here's your handbook. This is what. Oh, actually, you do get handbooks now, but you never used to. But you can get all the info. But no one gives you a handbook on how to deal with your kid coming home and saying, "I want to change genders." That's a difficult one because my immediate reaction was, what I said to you about my life lesson number one: seek first to understand before being understood. So I'm trying to understand it from her perspective. I accept her as she turns up, regardless. And as you can hear, I'm calling her he, not he. She's, to me, she's she. And we've got this we on this journey together, trying to work out, and it was tough for her. But that journey it was her journey, not mine. As much as I could see her pain, I couldn't do much about that. And eventually, in 22, she took her own life. So that's where I'm rebuilding from. It anyone that's a parent will know it's probably your worst nightmare. And I can trust me. I can tell you now, you wouldn't want it. It's so I'm rebuilding from that place because all these things that happen to you, whether it's divorce, whether it's, one of your kids changing genders, whether it's your kid taking their own life, or whether it's, being treated badly as a child, all these things happen to you. And it's your ability to deal with that bad news and adversity that will determine the quality of your life. And that's what I got from a very young age. And I was very fortunate that I'm a great believer in personal development. So I'm always learning stuff and techniques and what I can do. I didn't have any techniques for that one from Zoe when she passed. It was something I never. And then the other thing as well is when that happened, I had this bizarre scenario. As I was grieving for my mother as well, because I never grieved because I was a child. I was a baby. I didn't know how to grieve at 3 years of age. So I'm grieving for two people at the same time, which was really difficult, really difficult. And it knocked me off balance. Took some time, but it took me a good year. And I'm never going to be the same. I'm never going to be the same. But these things happen. And it's funny because I did some therapy and was talking to a couple of people who had very similar experiences, and it's a very unique club you don't really want to be part of, but and I remember thinking, even though I was going through my own pain, I was helping them. And I was a Samaritan for a while. I was trained as a Samaritan back in 2006, 7. So that training kicked in really quickly because, it's not about trying to convince someone of something. You just have to let them talk, listen. And as you know, you're a great listener yourself. And so that part, as I said to you earlier, about imparting my knowledge or trying to help other people, was still kicking in at that stage because I was very lucky. And that's a really bizarre term, considering my kid had just passed, because she passed peacefully. She passed and was very organized, left letters. I knew why she'd passed. I knew we discussed it prior to her going. Whereas there was other people where their kids had gone, no letters, didn't have any idea they were in that space. One of them I spoke to had a phone call about 2 hours before the lad had gone. And in her head, she's thinking, if I had got that phone call and answered it, would I have saved? And I didn't have all that. I had obviously the massive grief, but I had solace in that she passed peacefully, and she organised herself and was very very thorough in the way she left this life, whereas other people didn't have that. And I thank her for that. But that enabled me then to help other people try and overcome their issues, because that must be tough, knowing full well, if I'd have answered that call, could I have got to my son before he passed? That woman really struggled with that. So So, but you know, all these things happen to you, and I'm in a better place than I was. I'm never going to be the same, but I'm in a better place than I was. And it's a slow process from building back up again. But I've got that resilience. I've got that resilience from every experience I've ever had, and I can draw on it. I can draw strength from. You ever watch that film Star Wars? Right. You know, at the end when they're all standing, they're in the background. You got Darth Vader, which was Luke Skywalker's dad, and you had Obi-Wan Kenobi. And they're standing in the distance, and then in the end, Yoda's there with them. That's like a picture of my grandmother, my mother, and my daughter standing up there, and I can see them in the distance, and they're smiling and they're cheering me on, saying, "Come on." Because you've got to take something from something like that. You've got to be able to. My daughter wrote me a letter and said in that letter, if you ever, you know, just call my name out, a couple of stars, call my name out, and I'll be there. And that gives me a little bit of comfort, you know. So I don't know if it makes any sense.
Oh, Paul, it does make lots of sense. And it's interesting that you recognized that you were grieving for the loss of your mother as well at that period. Was that something that was pointed out to you, or was it something you worked out yourself?
Everything come up from my childhood, everything.
Mm.
And it's funny because this I recognized this through in 2012 when Zoe first came out. She tried to take her own life. It was a very feeble attempt. It was more of a cry for help than a, but at that point I was thinking to myself, I couldn't understand it, why she'd want to do that. And I was at Green Park Station and the train was coming in the station, and I went to walk toward the platform as the train was coming in, and I had to snap myself out of it saying, "What are you doing?" Because I was about to jump in front of the train. And I came home, spoke to a few people about it who were very well-meaning by saying, "Oh, that's very selfish." And so I phoned Samaritans because I'm a trained Samaritan. I knew they wouldn't judge me for it. They would let me talk. And then I realized it was because at that moment, nothing could have been as worse than losing your mum as a child, unless one of your kids go. So I recognized it from that point years later. All the stuff from my childhood had come up, and thought, oh, because I'd suppressed it. I had suppressed all my feelings from childhood. You'll understand this as a coach, right? You got different responses. You got fight, flight, and another one which is freeze. And I froze all my emotions. I was in freeze response for many years until that point. And then I realized, oh, I'd been suppressing all my feelings, and I let them come up. I had to go through that. I didn't want to do an NLP technique to change the way I felt. I needed to let it come through me to heal myself. So that was quite a big one as well.
And you said you didn't have any techniques for when Zoe passed. And yet, all of these elements that you've spoken about come together in different ways.
Mm,
That,
mm,
there's no rule book of day one that you'll feel like this, day two, you'll feel like that. That's not what we're talking about. But when you spoke earlier about responsibility and your ability to respond and the desire that you have for freedom, the ability to be flexible, the priority that you've always had for family, it all comes together. That is the rule book. Your
mm.
values become the rule book in essence of
They
how
are, yeah.
you manage.
Mm, that's and it's funny. I let myself go through it because I knew I needed to go through it. And she died in the October the 3rd, 2022. And I remember the day where I made a decision. I could no longer continue doing what I was doing, which was because I did have very dark thoughts during that first couple of months. And it was on the 28th of December. And I'd been to the doctors, they'd given me antidepressants. I was quite honest with how I was feeling. And I'm taking one of these tablets on the 28th, thinking, why am I taking I'm Paul Ribbons. Why am I taking antidepressant tablets? And then I took part of her letter And she said, if anyone can take a shit situation and turn it into something worth fighting for, that's my dad. That's what she put in her letter. So I used that as a mantra, and I was walking the dog and saying it into my head loudly. If anyone could take, anyone could take, anyone. And I kept repeating it and repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. Now, mantras are very powerful. So yes, I did have techniques, but I had to go through it for them first 3 months to allow myself to grieve for all the stuff that had gone in my life and live with them feelings, because I did not want to put them back in the box. I wanted that to go through it. And then I made that decision that day. No, I cannot continue doing this. It took me a long while to get out of it, but that was the start of the process. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm an avid bike rider, a cyclist, and she came out in, she lived in Canterbury when she first came out as Zoe, and she died in Reading. And so I made a decision then on the anniversary of her death on the 3rd of October, 2022, or 23, I was going to ride from Canterbury to Reading on my push bike. It's 129 miles, I think it is. And so I hadn't ridden my bike for months properly. So I then put, because I'm this is what I'm like, right? So I think I've got 9 months, 10 months to get 9 months in it, because it's September, it's beginning of October. So I've got 9 months to get myself ready. So then I'm thinking, okay, I'm planning it out. So this month I'm going to do so many miles on my bike, so many rides, and I was getting. It's not about the mileage; it's about time in the saddle. So the more each week I increased, and so that was part of my recovery. And little things that I was doing to make sure. So I did my 100 life lessons. So I did it, I can't remember, 22nd of Jan it started. And every single day I would do a life lesson. And I did not feel like doing it. Every day I did not want to do it some days, but I forced myself. So I committed to it. I made a public statement, said I'm going to do 100 life lessons every single day on YouTube. It's going to go on Instagram, Facebook, and all that business. And wrote them all down and recorded them every single day, edited it, uploaded it, because I needed a regime. I needed a ritual every day, so I knew I was getting better. So that was how I did it, and now I'm in a position where, because it was a case up until that first couple of weeks in January, I wasn't even getting up in the morning until 10 o'clock, and I'd be like, I just didn't want to get up. I just didn't want to get up in the morning. I just didn't want to wake up. And I knew I had to have a purpose to do that. And that was the purpose, is to do something. And I can impart my lessons of life through these life lessons, through all these different things that have happened to me. I can impart them to other people. And that's part of the recovery.
Well, thank you for sharing, Paul, and thank you for taking us on what has been a difficult journey for you. I feel that we need to provide some resources in the show notes for anyone who is struggling, which we will do. We'll put the Samaritans in there. Are there any other suggestions that you have?
Not resources that I use specifically. I turn to individuals that I know, which I can't really sort of like put them out there. But
I think that's important, though, that message of speaking to people. Yeah, mind.
Yeah, I'd say mind. Because I think, I can't stress this enough, Amy, right? We've had conversations in the last few months. I'm in a completely different place. I don't want a sob story. I'm only telling this because we're talking about purpose. We're talking about, why. And I think it's important to understand the back catalogue, so to speak. It's not that way anymore. I'm very, very focused. I'm very positive about life. And I can see this next chapter for the next 20, 30 years of my life being I've got grandchildren. I'm a big family man. So I'm in a very, very good place. It's not, and I think it's understanding and recognizing. That's the thing. Is like when I first recognized I was suffering, And especially with an alpha male, not many people or blokes come out and say, I'm actually suffering. And there's more suicide in young men than any other group, because they're struggling, they can't cope. So if people can't cope, get help. Definitely get help, because it's definitely worth. And it's funny, when I did my ride, I did it for charity. I did it for Papyrus, which is the prevention of young suicide. And a couple of people in the property arena, who were quite well known, and I'm not going to mention their names, reached out on a personal message and said, one of them said to me, they'd attempted three times in the past. Thank goodness they didn't, because now they're in a different place. So there is hope for people. There is massive hope. There is people out there you can talk to. Don't let it define you. Talk about it, get it out, because it's a bit of a taboo subject, mental health, but it doesn't have to be. I found it debilitating, and it doesn't have to be debilitating.
Indeed. And thank you again for sharing your experiences. And also, you spoke right at the beginning about how recognizing that every day after you realized that you'd gone past the age that your mother was when she passed, every day was a bonus. And you've had the best part of 39 years of bonus life now, right? And, that is the message here, that it is possible if you get the help and the resources, and you speak to people and you share what it is you're going through. Paul, thank you. How would people reach out and connect with you? What's the best way for them to do so?
They could probably reach out on my website, paulribbons.com, or they can email me direct, paul@paulribbons.com. Nice, easy one. If someone wants to reach out, they can do so. I've got a YouTube channel, Paul Ribbons, Instagram, Paul Ribbons, and Facebook, Paul Ribbons. So they can reach out to me on them. I mean, it's funny because today I posted a video on YouTube, Instagram, and what have you, about being teetotal, and how society tries to condition you, and if you say I want to be teetotal, I'm giving up alcohol, people automatically assume you've got a problem, right? And then they try and discourage you from giving up. And so I've just done a little video on that, because I'm quite strong about that at the moment. So
yeah, you and me both. So thank you for sharing. I have had a real pleasure listening to your story and your journey and your focus on why you do what you do, and why you are who you are. So thank you, Paul, for being so authentic and genuine and honest. It really is a privilege to witness that. Have you got some final words, please, for the listener?
life is what you make it. Right? It's going to throw you curveballs. It's not going to be fair. But you have the choice. You have the power. The power is in the choosing. And how I describe that is, people tell me, I've got to go to work, I've got no choice. We have got a choice. Everything is a choice. No, I've got to go, because if I don't go, I'm not going to get paid. I said, well, that's a choice in itself. You could stay at home, but you won't want the consequences of that choice. And that's the difference. It's understanding everything is a choice. You may not want the consequences of the opposite of what you've chosen, but you've actually chosen what you've chosen. And people don't see that, but it is there right in front of you if you look.
What value have you gained from tuning into Focus on Why today? What are your reflections with actions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or via LinkedIn, and share how Focus on Why has made a difference to you. Your feedback not only will inspire others, but will help them to discover how Focus on Why has created powerful ripple effects. Let's continue the conversation. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or X, join the Focus on Why Facebook group, and sign up for my weekly newsletter, Friday Focus, to keep in touch. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.